Hi, this is Dan Bullard, retired electronics engineer, sitting out on the front deck of my houseboat again. It's a nice sunny day. There's somebody working on their boat, but we're just going to ignore them. I want to talk about testing filters again. I've done a number of videos about testing filters, and filters are a big deal. What do you do with filters? You get rid of harmonic, but you get rid of a lot of other things too, but filters are a very important thing. And when you have to test them, you generally have to do an FFT, generally. If you do an FFT in Excel, as I mentioned, it can take like 45 minutes up to an hour and a half to do an FFT in Excel. But that's not always the case. FFTs are not inherently slow. FFTs can be extremely fast. And I'm going to talk about an article that I put up on my DSP page. Download what you can, and this is a PDF, so you can download it and then you can save it. So it's called Time Multiplex Multitones, and it's something I've never seen before, and I came up with it 20 years ago, I think. But it's pretty cool. I showed you TCF tests, and I showed you how you can use multitones to test a filter, and that works great. It works pretty good. It's very fast. You don't have to do a set up, burst, capture, and process. I remember I learned how to do Excel from a guy named Tin Lam. Brilliant guy. Vietnamese guy, brilliant guy. So, Sakamoto and all you guys, you can call me a racist if you want, but the smartest guy I know was Tin Lam, and he's probably still out there, but a really smart guy. And he showed me how to do all this stuff in Excel, but there are faster ways to do it, and you're not going to do it any faster than this, I guarantee you. The minuses for multitones is that they're somewhat error prone. I showed you in TCF test, you can do a random number generator to move the phases around, and that does help you with the peak to RMS ratio, but you're still limited, so it's a problem. Now, in time multiplex multitones, what you do is you create each individual tone in time domain rather than frequency domain, and then you concatenate them together end to end. And then you start AWI and the ACI together. You start them as a phase-aligned pair. And then when you run it, you capture the ACI and you pull out the individual tones from the ACI, and then you process with an FFT. And you'll be surprised how fast the FFT can be. It's really amazing. Now remember, this was 20 years ago, so remember that. Okay, so here is 3 tones, and Tin Lam, he used to test filters. I tried to get him into testing filters with periodic white noise. He's like, nah. All my sales guys were going on there, oh, you got to use periodic white noise. Well, Tin Lam knew better. He knew how to do this stuff with individual tones. And they thought they could, the salesman thought they could convince Tin Lam to go with periodic white noise, but he knew better. And like I said, he's a genius. I tell you, man, that guy is smart. Anyway, so here's a 3-tone test. The Tin Lam would approve of this. Doing 3 tones for a filter. And so here's 1 megahertz, 15 megahertz, and 20 megahertz. What we do, again, is we create the waveforms in time domain, and we concatenate them together. We just put them end to end. And so here we have 1 megahertz, 15 megahertz, and 20 megahertz. This is a post-cal waveform. Now, why is the 1 megahertz relatively small and the 20 megahertz so big? Because of sine x over x. Remember, sine x over x reduces the amplitude of your higher frequencies when using AWG. And so that's an issue. You have to take sine x over x into account. And if you don't, guess what happens to you? You get sent to South Korea, and they treat you like an animal. So, don't forget about sine x over x. Okay, now I calibrate it by, doing, like I said, you send the waveform out through around the filter, and then you capture it, and then you change the amplitude of each waveform individually, each signal, so that you get exactly the right amplitude for each frequency. And that compensates for sine x over x and any other roll-off that you might have. If you used a filter on the AWG, or AWI in this case, which you might, it'll compensate for that, which is kind of cool. Now here's a close-up of the two waveforms, the 1 megahertz and the 15 megahertz, and it's pretty cool. It's like, it's amazing how much bigger the 15 megahertz has to be. You have to consider that, remember that the waveform that you have coming out of the AWG or in the AWG is not the waveform that the part's going to see. And so after I do the calibration, here's what you get. Remember, the digital version of the waveform does not compensate for sine x over x. Sine x over x only happens once it becomes analog, and that's in the AWG. And so here it is after we calibrate it, and notice that all the amplitudes are exactly the same. The 1 megahertz, the 15 megahertz, and a 20 megahertz. And boy, my printer didn't like this one. So those are the individual tones, and they have exactly the same amplitude. And you might look at the 20 megahertz and say, oh, but that has like some kind of artifact in there. No, 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 no. No, no, no. That's just the way it displays. You know, you can't call that artifacting. That's, you know, you're going to be like Terry Wilson at Maxim. That's not it. I don't care if you got a master's degree or not. You know, that's not a problem, not really an issue. When you look at the post-cal close-up, that's amazing. That is amazing. The 15 megahertz, it looks, again, it looks like there's some artifact kind of thing going on, but actually not. That's just the display. Don't worry about it. It's not an issue. Sine x over x has already been corrected for. So now there's something you have to keep in mind. You can't just capture the whole thing and do the FFT on it. You can't do that because discontinuities from the 1 megahertz to the 15 megahertz to the 30 to the 20 megahertz is going to cause you problems. You don't want that. I found a way kind of around that, sort of, and I have another article on my DSP page to explain that, but you really don't want to do that. It doesn't really overcome it completely. I thought maybe I found a way, but no. But there is a way to do it, and let me show you here. It's pretty cool. You don't make the change in the middle of the waveform. You make the change from one frequency to another at the peak. And that's the least intrusive way, even though you would think that a discontinuity in the middle of the waveform, like a Class B amplifier with crossover distortion, would be the way to go. Actually, in fact, if you're trying to decrease discontinuities, you want to do it at the peaks, which really improves things. But we're going to try to avoid doing that. So what we're doing is we're making it 4 times longer than we need. We only need 2048 samples per tone. So we're triggering the ACI to capture 2048 out of the 1 megahertz and 2048 out of the 15 megahertz and 2048 out of the 20 megahertz. So that's the way you do it. So here's a good explanation. Notice that what we're doing is we're using triggers to capture, and you can, that's one of the cool things about the next test. You can trigger it off of anything, digital or the ACI, AWI. So we capture just the 1 megahertz away from the discontinuities. We capture the 15 megahertz away from the discontinuities. And we capture the 30 megahertz away from the discontinuities. And yes, I know that looks strange, but that's just because of the way it displays. It's not really an issue. Don't worry about it. Now, when we do that, there's 2 ways to do it. You can take the waveforms that you captured, and then you can add them together, because at this point it doesn't matter, right? You can add them together and then do one FFT. And so here we show that the Tone 1 mag is 1.00034 volts peak to peak. And tone 2, that is the 15 megahertz, is 393 volts peak to peak, and what the relative value is. And tone 3 is really close to that too. And so it's well below a dB, well below. It's like micro dB away, and that's infinitesimally small. And that takes 79.5 milliseconds. Now this was 20 years ago, so be aware of that. I mean, this was on a Xenon processor, Intel Xenon processor doing the DSP, so it didn't take very long to do this, 79 milliseconds. Now method 2, perform the FFT on each wave separately. And so there you see we got a tone 1 mag in this method. Tone 1 mag was 0.999927 volts peak to peak, and tone 2 mag was 0.999989 volts peak to peak, and relative to tone 1 it was 0.00000538 dB relative to tone 1. So it's like amazing. And the test time was 83 milliseconds, 83.1 milliseconds. So how long did it take to do an FFT on the next test with a Xenon processor? Well, in the first case we did 1 FFT. In the second case, in method 2, we did 3 FFTs. And so what does that mean? It's 4 milliseconds difference, right? Almost 4 milliseconds. So it took a little over, what, a millisecond and a half? About a millisecond and a half to do an FFT. A millisecond and a half to do an FFT. And I'm complaining about doing FFTs in Excel and it's taking 45 minutes. So you can tell how slow the Excel stuff is. It's really, really slow. Yeah, I can take 45 minutes because I'm retired. I can do nothing at all. And just sit around and say, okay, it's time to go check on the FFT. Okay, it's done. Let's see what we got, blah, blah, blah. You know, I mean, but in a production test, 83 milliseconds. 83 milliseconds. Think about that. That's nothing for one filter. And that's testing 3 points in the filter. And now I can use Tin Lamb's trick to figure out where the roll-off is. So it's pretty cool. So the FFT on the next test 20 years ago was a millisecond and a half. Now who knows what it is today? I don't know. You know, multiple cores and stuff. And if you do multi-threading, shit, man, you can scream through it. So you can do some amazing stuff. But this is kind of a cool technique. You do the burst. The big thing is how long it takes to get the instrument set up, do the burst, and do the captures, and then you have to download the waves and do the FFTs on them. But the FFT takes very little time at all, so it's pretty amazing. So it's kind of a cool trick. This is one of the things on my DSP page. There's a lot of others, but I thought you should know about this. So take a look on my DSP page, download the PDF if you want to. Like I said, I don't know how long this stuff's going to be around, you know. It depends. I don't know how long. It cost me $25 a month to keep that web page open. So after I go, I'm not sure my wife's going to keep it up, and I don't blame her if she lets it drop. So just be aware, those things are not going to be there forever, okay? But the LinkedIn articles will be there as long as LinkedIn's around, and the YouTube videos, I consider these like the Feynman lectures. You can still go on YouTube and find Feynman lectures. And, you know, am I comparing myself to Feynman? Well, yeah, okay. So, you know, my YouTube videos hopefully will be around some length of time. And a lot of my articles are still online, even 20, 30 years ago or later. 20 or 30 years later, they're still there. So I expect a lot of my stuff will still be there in a few years, and maybe forever, who knows, you know. but it's pretty cool stuff. Okay, so it's a beautiful day. I'm gonna wrap it up, so let's get out of here. So once again, from the river, this is Dan Bullard. See you later.